As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage, and Bethany, as the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you just as you enter it, and you will find a colt there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here, and if anyone asks, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'The Lord needs it, and will send it back here shortly.'" Verse 4, they went and found a colt outside the street, tied at a doorway. As they untied it, some of the people standing around were asking, "What are you doing untying that colt?" And they answered as Jesus had told them, and the people let them go. And when they brought the colt to Jesus, they threw their cloaks over it, and he sat on it. This is the triumphal entry in the Easter story. You know, this is what we call Palm Sunday. Jesus rides into Jerusalem on this colt, and people are laying down their jackets and palm leaves to give this donkey carrying Jesus away to roll into town. But I kind of want to focus on the part where Jesus tells them to do something that seems kind of insane. He's like, "Hey, disciples, go steal a horse for me." Like, like what would you feel like if God was like, "Hey, go steal a car, take some people to church"? Like, amen. Like, "Officer, I swear God told me to steal this car. Like, I promise. Like, God told me to do it." And they're like, "Yeah, we've heard that one before. Step out of the car, sir." You know. So God asked them to do the small task, but it also seems kind of insane. He's like, "Oh yeah, go get this donkey, go get this horse, this colt, and the people who own it are just gonna be totally chill." Which, if you've ever known people who own horses, if you try to take their horse or their donkey, they would not be totally chill about that. Like, they would just not be chill about it. So he's asking them to do kind of this crazy thing. So, like, God has this funny way of calling us to do things that seem a little bit crazy or that seem out of reach, that seem impossible. You know, if you haven't heard like the long version of the showers, how many of you guys have not heard me tell the story about kind of how the showers came to be? Tell us anyway. I'll tell you guys anyway, because this is one of my favorite stories. Ladies and gentlemen, it is story time. This is one of my favorites. So when I first moved to Colorado Springs to be part, like I moved to Colorado Springs from Texas to be part of the sanctuary. And at that time when I moved here, I did not know that I would be working for the church. I did not know that I'd be on staff. It just, God led it that way, and it just kind of happened. But one of the things early on that I wanted to see was a way for our homeless friends and neighbors to have access to showers. I saw the video online of another group in St. Louis that had done it, and it just seemed like, wow, like, okay, like this is the thing that we could do that really help people. What is the longest you've been without a shower? Has the longest, anybody more than 3 days? The longest I've been without a shower is 2 weeks. I had like it was when I had my motorcycle crash. I couldn't get any of my wounds wet for a little while. But like if you go camping, whatever, you go a couple of days without showering, you take a shower. Like, what do you say when you're done? I feel human again. Well, what if you don't have regular access to a shower? Like, I talked to some of our friends outside before showers opened up. Like 2 months was his last shower, and so just the look of relief and enjoyment and just on someone's face after they've had a fresh hot shower cannot be overstated. It's amazing. So God kind of placed this dream on my heart. I remember sitting down, I was at a food truck with Ben and Alex Yoder, and I was talking about like, I don't know how to get this thing started, and Alex was like, "Oh, that'd be awesome. I want to help any way I can." So fast forward a couple years, right before all the COVID craziness happens, this guy reaches out to us. His name is Charles. Charles, if you're listening online, hi, Charles. He and his wife, Barb, run a ministry called Sycamore Ministries. She volunteers at Westside Cares. And they're like, "Hey, we would like to do a shower ministry on the west side. Westside Cares said you guys might be a good fit." I was like, "You know what? I want to do some showers on the west side too. We should meet." And they're like, "Awesome." They're like, "Oh, by the way, we have $25,000 to start this project with." I was like, "Even better." So Charles and I, we talk and we kind of go through, like, we were going to get a trailer, then we were going to get a shipping container. And for a solid year, he and I kind of brainstormed, bounced ideas back and forth. We kind of started a little bit of fundraising. But it just really, for that year, it felt like we were running in peanut butter. Like you just couldn't get traction. Felt like your feet were stuck. We were just running into like dead end after dead end, closed door after closed door. And then about Thanksgiving that year, Michael and Leanna, who were wonderful people living in the carriage house, they moved to Florida. And I just kind of mentioned offhand, like, hey, what if we put our showers in that carriage house? And Dr. E and Cindy were like, oh, that's kind of a cool idea. And so they talked to the board. The board thought it was a good idea. So we moved forward. So once we decided to kind of go that direction, it was like the gates open. Like all of a sudden, Charles met this general contractor, Nathan, who's awesome, who ended up pro bonoing, is that how you say that? Who ended up doing a lot of work for free. We paid them to do some work, but they did a significant chunk free. Well, Nathan connected us to our architect who did the architecture pro bono, who connected us to mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineer who did their work for free, who connected us to an electrical contractor who provided labor and fixtures and wires for free. Rampart Plumbing Supply ended up donating a ridiculous amount of plumbing supplies. Company after company catching on, people that would just like happenstance across. Charles was playing pickleball and just kind of be talking to this guy, was sharing what he was doing. And this guy's like, oh, well, I'm a area rep for 3 states of such and such flooring company. Let me see what I can do about flooring. Just this random happenstance meeting, we got our flooring donated. It just time after time after time, like God just kept like opening these doors. And at some point I'm like, I can't even keep up. Like God is just providing so abundantly. Little thing or big things like the guy who donated the flooring, the building was old. And so he's like, I have really concerns about the concrete subfloor in here. Like it's pretty unlevel because it's an old building. He said, the flooring I have is wonderful, but man, I wish this was more level. So when they started doing the plumbing, the guy looking at the plumbing plans is like, man, I'm gonna have to dig a trench here and dig a trench here and dig a trench here. Like, I'm just gonna cut out the whole floor. So they just tore out the whole floor and poured us a new, completely fresh floor for our new flooring. Like, it was like, whoa. And so it's just like time after time after time. I mean, the process took a while. I mean, because, we still kind of had to deal with supply chain issues. And, sometimes like we would hit a snag that felt like things would take forever. But that kind of like pause, like I really learned to not have anxiety. It was hard. But that kind of pause paved the way for something awesome. Like it was like if we would have pushed and rushed and tried to do it in our own might, our own way or whatever, like we probably would have messed things up. But like God just kind of had this such divine timing going through. And so, and you see that in scripture, and you see that in a small way right here where Jesus is telling his disciples to go do this small thing, which ended up being a piece of a much bigger picture, right? You look at the story of Moses, saved from basically slaughter of all the Israelite children, of all the Israelite boys being slaughtered, raised in Pharaoh's house, ended up killing somebody, ended up living on some farm. He was like a country song. Like he fell in love with a farmer's daughter and ended up living on this farm, and God spoke to him. If you look in Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 8, it says, now Moses was tending a flock of Jethro, his father, definitely a country song with Jethro. Anyway, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and then he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There an angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire within a bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire but not burned up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight. Let me tell you, if I saw a bush on fire not being consumed and words started coming out of it, I'm not going to go check it out. I'm just going to be honest. But God started speaking to him. He said, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here am I. And he said, do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God, your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And the Lord said, indeed, I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and bring them out of that land into the good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And God's like, guess what? You're the guy who's going to do it. So Moses, who was a murderer, pretty much on the run, lived most of his life as a farmer. It's pretty well understood that, Moses was probably, like they said he was a stutter or whatever. So like he was kind of an unlikely leader, and God's like, hey, you're going to do this real big thing. And Moses was probably like, God, you're crazy, but okay. Just like a lot of things we do around here. So listening to how Jesus talked to his disciples, hey, go steal a horse for me. And listening to how God spoke to Moses, hey, you're going to lead my people out of freedom. Like we can learn a lot by the way, God interacts with people and Jesus interacts with. And I just have a couple that I'd like to point out. One of the things is where God calls, he leads, right? He says Jesus gave the disciples very specific instructions. In the story of Moses, the Israelites, God led them to the Red Sea. He saved them from Pharaoh and the army. He led them, later on, he leads them through the wilderness by a pillar of fire at night and by clouds during the day. Like God was leading them. Now, sometimes in our walk with God, the instructions are very clear. Like I knew some of my friends from Bible college back in the day. Man, they had their life mapped out. Like they knew like they were going to plant a church and they were going to do this. And like sometimes our instructions from God are like a roadmap. We have everything. And sometimes our instructions from God are one step at a time. And why one gets the one gets the other, I have no idea. But sometimes God is leading us one step at a time. It's almost like we're walking in a fog. But yet we can continue to trust that the next step is there, that the next step is there, that the next step is there. As long as you keep your eyes on the Father, keep your eyes on your calling, and put your trust in your faith in God, you know that that next step will be there. So everywhere God's calling us to go, he is leading us. Sometimes he gives us a lot of instructions and very specific instructions, and sometimes he gives us not as many. But we are still being led by God. We're still being led by the Holy Spirit. We can still be confident that we are going where he wants us to go. Another thing that we learn is where God calls, he provides. Much like the shower project, when the shower project started, talking to Dr. E and Cindy and some others, like there was a little bit of trepidation, but I was like, dude, like it'll work out, I promise. Like it'll be fine. Like I don't know where the money's gonna come from, but it's gonna be all right. Like trust me. And they trusted me, which was probably crazy on their part because who would trust me, right? It just kind of happened. And so where God calls, he provides. And so here in Mark, where Jesus is talking to the disciples, he tells them, go out and find a colt tied to a doorpost. Guess what? They went out and they followed the instructions, and there was a colt tied to a doorpost waiting for him. Like he provided every step of the way. If you look at the story of Moses and the children of Israel, like they're wandering through the wilderness and not really sure where their next meal is going to come from, and quail and manna from heaven just kind of show up when they need it. When they needed good, clean, fresh water, God gave them instructions on how to find good, clean, fresh water. So it's like God was providing for them every step of the way when they needed it. Like the disciples learned as they were walking with Jesus, they learned to trust. Even stories like the wedding that Jesus attended and they ran out of wine. And Jesus is like, oh, I got this. Bring me some water. And he turns water into wine. So like they learned in small ways, walking with Jesus, they learned to trust him in big ways. And when we walk with Jesus, it's like this accumulative effect. Like we just start learning to trust more and more and more. And as more happens, you learn to trust more. And, and that's kind of how we feel about, this, all the things that we need to do for the Care and Repair Project. We just know that God is going to take care of those details through folks like you, through folks listening online, through community partners. Like we know that the details are going to be worked out. And early on in the sanctuary, if you haven't heard the long version of the sanctuary story, early on in the story, like this building was gifted to us. Appliances for the gym kitchen were gifted to us. Like God has provided in ways every step of the way. I like what Dr. E says when you hear him tell the story. He says that he just really felt like the Holy Spirit tell him, son, you spent your whole life learning to let your circumstances dictate your faith in you. Your faith in me. Now I'm going to teach you how to let your faith in me dictate your circumstances. And so as we learn to trust God, every step of the way, God will continue to provide more and more. God will continue to show us how trustworthy he is. Now, let's be honest. Everything may not work out the way we want it to, right? I mean, like I would like I don't know what I'm thinking. Like I have a house, I have a place to live. But like I would like a big giant like ice chest full of ice cold Coca-Cola, whatever, I don't know. But like things don't always work out the way we want. Like, you may want a new car. Well, you may not always get that new car, but learning to trust in God, learning to trust God for everything you need. Like, my wife and I, our story of moving here, like God has just been so abundantly gracious to us, even to the point of like the school my kids go to ended up being perfect for them because both my boys are dyslexic. And as it turns out, they got it from me. So yeah, that's another thing I'm to blame for, right? So, but like even like the teacher they got when we moved here, she was like, oh, like she kind of noticed something, like, and they were just kind of falling through the cracks of the school they were at in Texas. So like little ways, even in my wife and I's story, we learned to trust God. We learned to have faith in God, that he would take care of us. And then lastly, like where God calls, he prepares the way. Like when the disciples went to go find that colt and they started untying it, people questioned them and they said, oh, well, Jesus needs it. And they're like, oh, totally cool. That's awesome. Like they would not have responded that way had their hearts and minds not been prepared ahead of time, right? Like they probably would have responded in anger. They probably would have responded very defensively. But because Jesus was looking for that particular colt, Jesus needed that particular colt. He had prepared the way for the disciples. And I mentioned earlier, like this was a small piece of a much bigger story. In Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, it was prophesied. It says, rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. It was prophesied that Jesus would enter Jerusalem on the colt of a donkey. And yet here the disciples are, probably unknowingly at the time, helping Jesus fulfill this prophecy. Like that way had been prepared for them. When Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, like he had picked out a place, he talked about this place flowing with milk and honey, right? Now, if you're familiar with that story, unfortunately, Moses doesn't get to see that story come to fruition. Like they sent some spies out to check out the land, and two of them were like, dude, this place is awesome. And most of them were like, dude, we got to stay back. Some big dudes in there, like we don't want to mess with it. And so they ended up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. God's still providing, God's still leading every step of the way. But they kind of reacted out of fear instead of reacting out of faith, and it set them back. Now, I say all that to say this. Like if God has a calling on your life, God has a plan on your life, something that was like a fire that was burning deep years ago that has kind of dwindled down because you feel like you've made some poor life choices, that doesn't expire. The call of God doesn't expire. The call of God doesn't go away. That flame just doesn't go out. Listen, we're not strong enough, we're not smart enough, we're not important enough to mess up God's plan. So any decisions or choices that you've made in life, any habits that you picked up that have set that back, let me tell you, that hasn't disqualified you. That hasn't ruined God's plan for your life. That hasn't ruined God's purpose, your calling. That hasn't ruined who you are. And it's just a setback, right? So when Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, he didn't get to see it, but the story of Jericho, Joshua, that's the name of it. The story of Joshua at Jericho is coming to fruition of that story of God leading them into the place of promise. Sometimes it takes patience and time to see what God has calling for us. I'm going to invite Seth and Zaria, or just Seth, up to come back up and play. And I just want to lead you guys with that to encourage you. If God is calling you and leading you someplace, he's going to lead you the entire way. He's going to lead the way. He's going to provide as you go. And he has already prepared the way for you. I heard a preacher say one time, he was the author of a book that he's speaking at a church. He said, God will often pre-position you for favor. He will often pre-position you for his plan. And it's kind of like how it happened with the shower project. Charles, who was helping us out a tremendous amount, happened to be playing pickleball with the right guy to get the flooring. And sometimes when we're following God, we feel like we've been abandoned. We feel alone. We feel left out. And sometimes God just wants us to be patient and wait for the other piece that he has lined up to come around. Because you know what? The other people he's using, guess what? They're human like us. And so like sometimes maybe they're reacting out of fear, and you just kind of have to wait a little while to come on. So what I'm saying is, God has prepared the way, and we don't need to rush it. We don't need to force it. We don't need to do it our way. If we just have patience and let God be God and us just follow him, things tend to kind of work out a little bit, right? So Seth is going to play, and I just want to leave you guys with an encouragement. If God is calling you to do something kind of crazy, listen to it. Like, don't rush into it, but listen to it. Like, I sat on the dream of the shower project for 2 years before anything happened, right? And so just listen to God, listen for his timing, and be ready. And when he says move, move. It could be something as simple as talking to a coworker about Jesus. It could be supporting a missionary. Our church supports a couple missionaries, we have some missionaries in Panama. It could be going on some type of relief trip or mission trip. It could be volunteering at the Shower Project or Ragamuffins. Like, God will give you this nudge. He'll give you this inkling and kind of push you in the right direction. Learn to listen to that. Learn to trust it. Learn to follow it. But also, more difficultly, learn to kind of be patient with it.
Thanks for tuning in to a message from the Sanctuary Church. For more information and media, go to our website at thesanctuarywestside.org or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube.